Episode 227, Parenting with Peace, with Tiffany Rhoton.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and a highly trained, experienced life coach making a great impact in the lives of their clients. And together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with a coach? Here we go.
In this episode, Heather is joined once again by life coach Tiffany Rhoton to explore the delicate art of parenting young adults. Tiffany shares how parents can let go of control, embrace agency, and build strong, lasting relationships by parenting from love instead of fear. With wisdom drawn from gospel principles and her deep coaching experience, Tiffany discusses practical ways to support young adults, even when their decisions differ from parental expectations. This episode is a beautiful reminder that trust, unconditional love, and connection are the true foundations of powerful parenting. Please enjoy.
Well, friends, welcome to the podcast today. As always, I am joined by another coach who has been on before. So fun. I was excited all day to get to have a conversation with Coach Tiffany Rhoton. Hey, Tiffany.
Hey, how are you, Heather?
I'm fantastic. Tiffany, I feel like I've known you for a really long time. This is one of the, I think, joys of the profession that we have is I've gotten to know so many people that I otherwise would never have known. And
Yeah.
I love it.
And we kind of become instant friends as soon as we all kind of geek out about this life coaching stuff and we just become instant friends, don't we?
Yeah. Well, and then you throw in the religious aspect too, right? So we have like the same profession, but we also have the same, religious background, and you combine those two things and it's like,
Yep.
you can have a pretty fantastic conversation with somebody and feel like you're
Yep.
long lost souls.
You and I, we could talk all day. We know that.
We
So,
could. We could. All right, we'll spare everybody from the long conversations. We can have those another time. But Tiffany has been on before, and before we get started, want you, Tiffany, to just kind of give us a little introduction in case somebody hasn't heard you before
okay.
on here.
Yeah, it's been a couple years actually since
Yeah.
I've been on. So I'm happy to be here again. But of course, I'm a life coach. I've been doing this about 7 years now. So lots of experiences talking to so many hundreds of young adults and getting to just get a peek into their life and the challenges that they all face. And it's so different than when I was a young adult. And I just adore this age group so much. I kind of help young adults figure out life and help them gain confidence in trying to make decisions and how to solve problems. And so for me, it's fun. And often I do get to talk to their parents, or I sometimes help coach their parents so that we can help them together have a better relationship. So I do that. Let's see, I've been married for 32 years. I have 5 children who are now almost totally grown. My oldest son is 31 and married, and I have some grandkids. And then my youngest son is getting ready to leave next week to the Provo MTC. So here I enter into this new phase of empty nester life. So I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but I adore and love the Savior and I'm grateful for his gospel. And it truly is a beacon for me and has been as I've raised my children. And so I feel it an honor and privilege to be a coach and in a funny sort of way, I feel like I help build the kingdom through helping young people figure out their life.
Yeah. Well, that's not a funny sort of way. That's like a
Yeah,
legitimate sort
it
of a way. I
is.
have instant jealousy when I think about the access that age group has to finding to coaches or to just any sort of mental health and decision making skills. I
Yes,
feel like I was a hot mess at that age.
me too.
And I remember thinking and like verbally saying to so many people, I think it's so unfair that we're having to make the biggest decisions of our life when we have so little life experience.
Right,
And I
right,
mean, it can feel really debilitating. There was a lot of decisions that that didn't need to be as hard as they were.
right. It is. It's one of the biggest. I don't think that there's ever a time in our life we'll be making more decisions for the rest,
Right.
of
Yeah.
our life. And I think that's part of the reason I went into this age group is because I think this was something I so wished I would have had. And they're really open-minded. They just are sponges. They take it in. And I have seen huge changes in this age group because of their humility in really seeking for and looking for help and tools to improve their life. It's
Mhm.
just I get a high every time I
Yeah.
talk
It's
to
awesome.
one just because I see how beneficial it is to them.
Well, and I'm curious. I wonder if I would have been receptive. Like, I feel like these kids, and I shouldn't call them kids, these young adults, these, men and women, I think they are more open-minded than we were.
Yeah.
I think they're coming to Earth with the ability to see things a little differently than, and not
Yeah.
so black and white as we did.
Yes, yes. More loving, more able to love all different kinds of people. And I love the idea of a life coach because I think in some people's mind, counseling sounds like you're broken or there's something wrong with you.
Hmm.
But a coach, they tend to kind of warm up to the idea. They're like, oh, they're just helping coach me through
Yeah,
life. And so it's a little less scary maybe to talk to a
yeah,
life coach.
for sure. I've had a couple of my children work with life coaches under the guise of like this person works with athletes or that like it's
Ah,
under like a different it was like they were maybe struggling in many different areas of their lives, but I was able to pinpoint something that made them feel like, oh yeah, this is just going to help me get better at this. Like it's
yeah,
not that I'm broken. I don't know, I just think there's different ways that we can, if you're a parent and you see that maybe there's something that
yeah.
your child could maybe use some help in, oftentimes a coach is a good avenue there because we
Yeah.
could,
I mean, you can call me the decision coach if you want.
yeah,
I'm really good at helping them
yeah,
out what
yep,
kind of decisions they want to
love it.
make. Yeah. A little bit less scary.
Well, and I think this leads me to something that some questions that we're going to talk about today. As a parent, we might see like, oh, I want my person to maybe see a coach because it's more of a controlling thing, right? We're trying to control them to do and act a certain way. They're like, oh, if they would just see things my way, if they would work with the coach, maybe they'll see things my way and
Yes.
they will they'll quote unquote be better or do better. And
Yes.
I want to know what you would say it truly means to walk beside our young adults rather than trying to lead them or forcefully control them on their path. Because, oh, as a parent,
Right.
sometimes you really want to do that.
Well, it is so funny to me. Sometimes I have, I'll do a consult call with the parents, first of all, and they want their child to see me. And sometimes I look and I think, I'm not sure who needs the coaching here, if it's the
Mhm.
parent or if it's the young adult, because
Yeah.
there's stuff that us as parents need to work through. We have lots of expectations and lots of things. And then of course, sometimes young adults and just, the struggles they're facing. And sometimes it's just I want to please mom and dad, right? And so um, but it's really hard for me when I have parents coming to me saying, "Will you please change my child?" And, I would say that's not really the goal, or that's not really what I'm after. I'm trying to help that child, your child, explore and figure some things out in a neutral space, right? But I do
Mhm.
think we come sometimes from a controlling place. And I first want to say, Heather, I know I'm a parent, you're a parent. We're all doing the best we know how. And we really do want the best for our children, don't we? And so that's coming from a really loving place. But I think sometimes we come from this. I think control is based in fear, and it's, the what ifs, what they could do. And so sometimes when our kids don't agree or don't want to do go down the path we want them to, then we start to feel this graspy, controlly place we want them to, and sometimes it's based in love and sometimes it's other things. Sometimes we have to do that. But I want you to think about what it looks like to walk next to someone, to walk beside someone versus trying to control them. And I think when we're walking beside someone, no one's pulling, no one's pushing, no one's trying to get ahead or behind. We're just literally walking beside. And what we're doing is allowing them to walk on their 2 feet and us walk on our feet. I see some parents that are trying to give their kids piggybacks and not want them to walk for, fear or whatever else. But really, I think, when we're trying to control, it's either we're trying to push or pull or get them to go a certain way in a certain direction. And I think when we're walking beside, we're giving our children the independence they want. And I think, developmentally, we know that these youth, children, whatever we call them, that it is a natural part of life for us to slowly become more independent. It's a natural thing and there's a purpose for it. And if we're shielding our children from being independent or making their own decisions, we're essentially not allowing them to build their own self-esteem, their own resilience, learn how to problem solve, learn how to gain experience. We're essentially saying, we don't want you to experience any of the hard, sometimes we call them lawnmower parents or snowplow parents. I have helicopter parents. There's all these phrases. And we're
You could be
essentially saying,
anything.
ooh, this is too scary to experience the world. So let us shield you from everything so that you don't have to experience, but we're somewhat crippling our children when we do so. That's not how God sends us here. He doesn't save us from the grief and the struggles and the trials of this life, because I think as an all-knowing God, he knows that that is what is going to give us the experience and the knowledge to really figure out who we are and what we truly want.
Mhm. Yeah, I like to think that I mean, like he's just trying to prove ourselves to us. He's just trying to prove to us that
Yeah,
we're capable of doing all these things.
right.
And I think if somebody steps in and is trying to lawn mow or helicopter or snowplow, it's essentially saying you're not capable. It's
Yeah.
like it's got that message to it, like, oh, you're not capable of doing this on your own.
Uh-huh.
And
I don't believe in you.
yeah, and
Mhm.
like the underlying message there can really create some problems for those children who are being given that message, whether a parent is trying to tell them that, intentionally or not.
Right, right. And it's interesting because when you look at God and Satan, Satan wanted to force us. He wanted to force us to do it a certain way so that we'd all just be these robots that do everything right and get back. And God in his wisdom is like, no, choice was so important to him that he lost a third of his children because of it. It's one of those huge principles of the gospel. Agency is huge in the Lord's eye. We have to have choice. And I've thought a lot about why that is, but I think it gives us experience. Choice is what gives us experience.
Hmm. Yeah, and that can feel really terrifying for a
Yeah.
parent to
Yeah.
like recognize that your young adult can go out and essentially make any choice that they want to. And
Right. And in the world in which we live, it is a little frightening, right?
yeah,
There's a lot out there, and I understand when us parents feel that way. I do sometimes too. It's just look at all the things they could get involved in. But again, that's coming from a place of fear, right?
hmm
That
hmm
we don't trust our kids enough to think that they might actually figure themselves out, figure this out, even if they take some diversions. I think even sometimes those diversions are what bring them to themselves, right? And help them
yeah.
figure some
So
things out.
I'm curious because some people who listening, sometimes it's easy to, okay, we'll say, is this coming from fear or is this coming from love? Is your desire to have your child do this a fearful desire or is it a, a desire coming from love? And a lot of people could say, well, yeah, I really want them to have this in their life. I want them to have the best life that they can possibly have. And so it kind of underlying looks like love. It kind of looks like love is the motive.
Right.
How would we distinguish the difference? How could somebody distinguish the difference between being motivated by love versus being motivated by fear?
Well, I think we act totally different as a parent, right? When we come from fear versus love. When we're coming from fear, it's coercion, it's trying to tell them what to do. And I think there's somewhat of pride in us. I know for me as a parent, 10 years ago, I was so different, Heather, before I found these tools, but
Same, same.
was coming from this idea that I thought that I knew best, that I am smarter than them, that I know everything, and that somehow I I am going to know what's best for their life versus what they do. And I think fear is I need to tell you what to do. I need to. It even looks like manipulation. I see that a lot where I have parents who, or I'll have young people come to me and they'll say, well, I can only do this. My parents said they'll only pay for my college if I go to a certain school. Or if I don't do what they say, they're going to take the car, my cell phone, and all the things if I don't do exactly what they want me to do. And again, that is assuming that we are the only ones that know. And we're basically saying, I think underlying, we're saying to our kids, you're dumb and I'm smart and you have no idea. And that's a very prideful place as a parent to be, right? I think some of the ways in which we control or fear and this is what I see a lot. There's like three different ways that I can think of that what will happen in our relationship if we're coming from a place of fear and control. Number one, I see a lot where they go ahead and do what we want them to do, right? Like they go to the college that we want them to, they study the major we want them to, they marry who we want them to, whatever. But then I also get the other end of this where I get 26, 27, 28-year-olds who did what their parents wanted them to, and they're not very happy. They don't like the field they studied. They're not happy. They didn't like the school, or they're very, very resentful because they didn't feel like they had a choice. They feel like
Mm.
mom and dad did it. Another way that I see is they just flat out rebel. They're just like, you know what? If you're not going to let me decide, then I'm just going to go ahead and just rebel against everything you've taught me because I am determined to be independent and choose for myself. And then I think the third way is just the relationships are really, there's a lot of conflict and polarization. I see this a lot anymore with all the things out there. Kids are separating themselves more and more from their families, from their parents, from their roots in trying to decide for themselves and not be forced to believe, not be forced to do it a certain way. I think our generation and maybe even the generation before us, it was very black and white. It was you go to college and you do this, and this is the only way and the right way to do it. And I think this generation is kind of bucking that and saying, there's lots of ways to be successful. There's lots of ways to be smart or educated. And they're kind of pushing back on these old ideas that there's just one right way to do life.
Mhm. I would say that probably connection, like our ability to connect with our young adult children becomes really vital. I mean, they don't want to be controlled. They don't want to. The only way we continue to have influence in any way, and not that we want influence isn't really the goal, but we want them to know that we love them. And I
Yep.
guess the connection becomes so important. I'm curious what you would say are some good ways for us to create those connections, keep those connections strong rather than watching them separate, as you've said. Like this generation tends to be like kind of separating themselves more than others.
I mean, you and I know we went to school in this. This is what we do as life coaches. This is what we are trained to do is to really, really listen
Hmm.
and trying to listen with the ability to understand, right? And so we were trained to what they call hold space, which is basically we're giving people space to feel how they want to feel, think what they want to think, say what they want to say in a place of neutrality and non-judgment. And I know that's easier said than done, especially as a parent, because we have high emotions when it comes to our children. We have high desires for them and expectations. But I think one of the best ways is learning to listen. I don't think, and I'm going to include myself in this, we as parents are pretty lousy at listening.
Hmm.
We tend to want to kind of give our take. We want to influence, we want to manipulate, we want them to think the way we think, we want them to see things the way we see it. And they might not. And so part of it is listening to understand. And what does that look like? It's instead of withholding the judgment long enough to allow them to say what they want to say and for us to listen to what, really listen to what they're saying. So what that can look like is, your daughter comes to you and she says, Mom, I want blue hair. Now, the natural, at least the parent in me used to be, we don't do blue hair
We're
in
not
this
doing
house.
that. Yeah.
Okay, we're not doing that. And then I go off on all the reasons why it's not good to have blue hair.
Uh-huh.
But do you see how immediately I've shut down that child and not really understanding, okay, what is really underneath this blue hair? Because there's always, as you and I know, we're the
Yeah.
diggers, right? That's what
Yeah.
life coaches do. What's underneath this blue hair? And so sometimes just repeating back to them, oh, you want blue hair? Tell me about that.
Yeah.
Tell me what that's about. They might say, well, everybody in the high school is doing blue hair, Mom. Oh, okay. So you're just kind of trying to fit in. Is that, what you're kind of telling me? You're just kind of want to, I can understand that. I remember wanting so much to fit in and be a part. And, I can kind of see that. And it's not that we're not teaching, but you see how we're trying to kind of help them understand, not in a way where we're trying to coerce or make them, think that it has to be our way. We're literally listening to understand. And what that does to a child is they suddenly go, oh, my mom is listening. She's trying to understand me. She's trying to see my point of view. And what that does is actually create a bond, right, amongst kids. I gave this analogy to some parents recently where, I sometimes I practice, like, if my child were to come and say this to me, how would I react? Because I have a lot of friends where they've been in this boat, right? Where kids come and tell them something and they're like, ah! And so I literally practice how I would, respond. And one of my favorites, and I do this as a life coach, is just tell me about that. Like, help me understand where you're coming from. I have an example, and it was really huge for me as far as a coach goes. And it was years ago when I first started, but I had a young man who had a chip on his shoulder. His parents wanted him to be there. I'm not sure he wanted to be there. And he was kind of out to, and I think sometimes our kids are this way, but out to kind of see, like, you're going to love me, you're going to accept me. And so he was really big on the shock factor. And so one day we were talking and he was talking really negatively. And I said, can you think of anything in your life that you love or that is good? Because all you tell me is everything in your whole life is terrible. Is there anything that's good? Well, here was the test. He said, Tiffany, I love to do acid. Now, as a parent, I'm not sure how I would react to that. But as a coach, I knew what he was doing. He was testing me. And so I said, oh, acid. Tell me about that. What do you love about acid? The kid was floored, absolutely floored that I didn't get mad at him, that I didn't say, did you know that's against the law and that you could, all the things. I just said, oh, you love acid? Tell me about that. And he was like, well, and it shocked him so much he had a hard time
Yeah.
responding. And he was like, well, I mean, like, it helps me escape and whatever. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And he said, I'm kind of shocked you're not mad. And I said, oh, well, I said, to be honest with you, I don't think it's a great idea to do acid. I mean, if you were to ask me, I'm like, probably not a great idea. It does all kinds of things to your body. But, I mean, I guess that's your choice. If you want to do that, there's consequences to it, whatever. But that was what opened up the relationship with this kid. And after that, he was like, no matter what I tell this lady, she's just going to try and come from this space of love, non-judgment, and trying to understand me. And boy, did we get far after that. It was like he just needed to know that I was going to love him and accept him no matter what. And I do think kids do that sometimes. What
Oh, for sure
are
they
you going to
do.
love me if I tell you this? You're gonna still love me if I, choose to go a different way. And when we come from this place of like, tell me about that, tell me where you're at, tell me where your
Hmm.
testimony is. Okay, so you're struggling with that. Tell me what you've come up with. And we just ask questions and then we truly listen and try and figure out what's in their hearts. I promise there's things underneath that. And it's not trying to be rebellious and it's not trying to be naughty. They're after something there.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so two things come to my mind. First of all, poker face. Like my kids have been teaching, but I've been learning to play poker. My kids like to play, and they're
Yes.
always like, you don't have a very good poker face, mom." So we probably as parents need to work on our poker faces. But
We definitely do.
second of all, I really appreciate that because I think a lot of us think that if we just that we would respond with why. We could respond
Huh?
why. And I think why in and of itself can sound judgmental. I love that you've said you've changed it and you're like, tell me about that because the difference between tell me about that and why, I know that it's not much, but I think it really is different. It sends a different message. Why
Mhm.
can have this like underline.
I'm questioning you.
Yeah, yeah.
And tell me about that is just nothing more than okay, I'm trying to understand your
Hmm.
view.
Hmm. Yeah, I really like that. Appreciate that. Okay, so how then does a parent provide support in some way without overstepping, without feeling, we don't want our child to feel like we're trying to control, but yet I do think there's sometimes that, input might be helpful. I don't know. So we can start to feel really stuck in do I say anything? Do I
Right.
just let them do what they want to do without saying anything?
Right. And I definitely think, it's not also not our job to just step back and let them do whatever they want and never say what we think, because then that's us not being true either and
Right.
expressing how we feel, right? But if we can create this safe place. And so I gave this example to some parents recently where I said, okay, so your child comes to you. I kind of tried to think of an outlandish thing so that it really get them thinking, but I'm like, okay, so let's say that your daughter comes to you and says, I'm going to Vegas to be a stripper. Now, immediate reaction, talk about a poker face,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, we've got to mask those feelings of like, what in the world are you thinking? You know what I mean? But so again, we're like, oh, okay. So you're thinking you want to go to Vegas and be a stripper. Okay, tell me about that. Tell me where you're at, what you're thinking, why, maybe down the road you could say, why have you come to this decision? Tell me about
Hmm.
it. You've got to do it in a place of understanding. But then at that point, when I've listened and I've talked to them and they've given me all these reasons and sometimes they don't think through all the consequences, right, of everything. And so I think that's where we can teach, but again, not in a graspy, coercive way. It's just like, well, have you thought about what might happen if you do this or what the potential problems with that could be, what the potential things down the road could create for you? Like, I think it's okay to educate. Or I remember when my son said he was going to quit college, and I remember saying, well, down the road, you might find that some bosses will only hire you with a bachelor's degree or whatever. And he said, I know, mom, and maybe someday I'll go back and do that, but right now I'm going to take this avenue and do this. And I had to trust him enough to know that he was going to make that decision basically whether I wanted to or not. But I did educate him and I said, this is what I think, and down the road this could happen. And he said, I'm aware, mom. And I said, are you prepared for that? And he said, yeah, I am. I said, okay, all right. We have to take on a different role. When our
Yeah.
kids become adults, we have to take a different role on. And it is no longer telling them every move to make. It is listening, it is supporting. When he decided to go do what he did, it's like, okay, I'm going to jump on board then. I'm going to support you any way I can. I'm going to help you and let you know that I believe in you. I believe in what you can do. And that's been really helpful. And then the beauty of that is we still have a relationship, right? It wasn't like, well, if you're not going to do what I think, then you're out and I'm done. And then we kind of distinguish that relationship or extinguish that relationship.
Extinguish.
And then we don't have any ability to have any influence at all.
Hmm. Well, and I think I can't help but think that if a child feels like, okay, my parents are behind me on this, and you are willing to support them, there's no way that that can't in some way, especially if it's a good desire, right? Give
Yeah,
them a leg up on what they're doing, right? If they're always like, oh, my parents don't believe in me, they're probably going to have a little bit of a like a limiting belief in their head that they're
right,
not going to be able to do it either.
right, right, exactly.
Mm.
And just allowing them to, I was talking to my sister and her son wanted to go to this college and she didn't really want him to, but he was kind of going to do it his way anyway. And so after a bit, she's like, okay, all right, how can I support you? How can I help you? I'll help you move out. I'll help you get down there, whatever. And it's interesting because she kind of told him these might be some of the issues if going that far away, your car doesn't work really well, all these things. And he on his own figured out, oh, wow, this wasn't a very good decision. I don't like this school. It's too far away from home. I don't have a good car. I keep breaking down, like all the things. I'm having a hard time making my rent, all these things. But it's just been a beautiful process. And now all of a sudden he's coming back to mom going, oh, wow, maybe I should listen to some things you say because actually most of what you told me actually has kind of come from fruition. But you see how if she'd have come from this controlling place, like, no, you're not doing this, he would have rebelled, but it would have ruined the relationship where
Right.
she said her piece, he said his, she supported him. And then on his own, he came to himself and he figured it out. And now it's burned in his memory.
Yeah.
He's experienced it and went, oh, not a great decision.
Yeah. Well, the relationship remains intact, which is what we want,
That's
right?
what we want,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Whenever I talk about parenting or whenever anybody on the podcast is here with me talking about parenting, I can't help but see the parallels between a relationship with our Heavenly Father and
Yeah.
parenting in general. And how do you think God guides us in our parenting journey? How do you think he models good parenting? I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to look to find, you can't really find bad examples of that, but I'm curious how how you would say he models that.
I love when I study the scriptures, I love to always come in with that lens, like watching, understanding the nature of God, understanding where he's coming from, and also the way in which he parents. Because I think we could all say he's a good parent, but it doesn't mean that all of his children choose him or choose his way or whatever. And so, how is he able to do that? And I thought about this. I teach gospel doctrine in my ward, and recently we had this conversation where we were talking about, Martin Harris, Joseph Smith, and those lost 116 pages. And we can look at that and say, wow, what a huge blunder. But God led him. He asked, and God did express his opinion. He's like, not really a great idea. But he allowed Joseph, which I think is a powerful parenting lesson right there, is he allowed him. He allowed him to make that mistake. But here's the beautiful part of it. He already had him covered. 2,400 years before here, he had already figured out a way to cover this mistake and make it right. And really that's what the atonement is about, right? Is it's, I know you're going to make these errors. That's why I sent my son. That's why I atoned for this so that you could learn in a space that would allow you to learn without eternal consequences, right? That you have the ability to learn. And it was a great learning experience for Joseph. And after that, he's like, okay, I trust you. I'm not going to worry about what man thinks anymore. The other example that I was thinking about as I was preparing for this was the Savior was the one that taught the parable of the prodigal son. It was the Savior teaching this parable, this story. And I was thinking about how powerful the lessons are in this story. Number one, God, or well, the Father, who represents God, allowed his youngest son to take his inheritance and to go do something. Now, I am sure that father was thinking, not a very good idea. I don't think it's a good idea to take all your money, dude. I don't think it's a good idea to go far away and splurge and do all these things. But I think it's a powerful thought that that father allowed his son to do it without, and maybe the father had fear, I don't know, but I think the key to this whole parable is the son did go out. He did splurge. He did make some mistakes. He got to a point he was, you know, wanting to eat what the pigs were eating. He was starving. He'd blown it. He'd made some mistakes. But I think the most powerful phrase in this whole parable is he came, and when he came to himself, the Lord allowed him on his own, without him next to his side, come to himself. Let him experience, let him learn the lessons. Now it's burned in his memory. Wow, really not good choices. And I imagine it changed this young man's life because after that, he's like, wow, I have just learned by experience that is not a great way to live. And there were some consequences, right? It wasn't as if the father just said, well, come back, it's all good. He's like, well, you did blow your inheritance. So there are going to be consequences, and he allows for those. But I also think it shows, and this is where the atonement really comes in this story, where God is looking from afar off. So he's always nearby, hoping, wishing, praying for, doing what he has the power to do. And then when he sees him, he runs and he kisses him. And it shows this ultimate love the father has for his children, which is no matter what you do, no matter where you go, there's nothing that will keep you from that love of God and from that atoning blood. And even the son, he goes into this place of shame and he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in thy sight. I am no more worthy to be called thy son. And yet the father, goes on to just say he was lost and now he is found. And so basically, the father again teaches him the atonement's real. The atonement is real. It covers you. But I think the key here is he allowed him to choose. He allowed him to experience. He always brought in love. He was always looking for him and praying for him and hoping for him, which is, I think, the way in which we can show up as parents. We can't necessarily control everything they do, but what can we control? We can control how we act and how we choose to love them and support them in whatever they decide to do, and know that no matter what, you're always going to be loved by me. You're always going to be welcome to be with me, right? There's a
Yeah.
quote I found by Elder Renland that I thought was really powerful. He said, though God wants us to be on the covenant path, he gives us the dignity of choosing. Indeed, God desires, expects, and directs that each of his children choose for himself or herself. He will not force us. Through the gift of agency, God permits his children to act for themselves and not to be acted upon. Agency allows us to choose to get on the path or not. There's a power in that choice, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so good. I have come to realize through, my coaching of parents and just myself in general, that if I find myself not showing up in my parent-child relationship the way I want to, it's because I have some work to do with how I view God. Like I'm viewing him as somebody who gives good for good, to use Adam Miller's words, somebody
Yeah.
who gives good for good and evil for evil. Like I'm seeing him as being somebody who's going to punish me or my child because they've made certain choices. And as soon as I can check my view of God and bring that, like restore that to what I think he truly, to what I know him to be, a lot of my fears in parenting go away. And I think, Adam, like I said, quoted Adam Miller, I think he says we have a God who gives good for good and good for evil. When I can look at it from that perspective, I am more able to give good for good and good for poor, good for the poor choices. I don't feel like I have to withhold. Because we often, and you probably get asked this too by parents, well, if I just watch my child do this without saying anything or just act like I love them, then I'm condoning their behavior. I'm saying that I believe what they're doing is right.
Yeah.
And, that's not true, right? Anytime we're like, oh, I've got to withhold love because of what they're doing, we're viewing God as being that way as well, I think. So,
And he describes himself as one where his hands are always outstretched,
yeah, yeah.
right? Always outstretched. It's interesting. I have a dear friend whose daughter has chosen a gay lifestyle. She has a partner and some children. And it's been difficult for my friend. That's not really what she had, hoped for this particular daughter. And, has struggled with this condoning idea, or how do I love her, or how do I do this, right? It's kind of been a growing process for her, but she told me recently that her daughter wrote her a long letter and said, Mom, I know how we were raised. I know how you believe. I know this is hard for you. I know that you don't necessarily agree with the way I am living, but I really, really appreciate that you just love and support me anyway and help me just have the space to figure my life out. But knowing that you love me allows me to, in fact, she's come more to a relationship with God, I think, because she can see this love, this pure love
Mhm.
coming from this mother. And that's the thing. Our children know what we think.
Yeah.
They don't really need to say a lot.
They grew up in our house, right? They
Yeah,
know what we
they
think
know
about
exactly.
everything.
We don't really need to tell them. They know, but they also, again, have to make this choice. And I was thinking about this recently, is the nature of God a God of fear? Is he anxious? Is he fearful? Is he frustrated? And I mean, even the scriptures, we know the scripture. I wrote it down here. It's 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And so, if God is not fearful, then why? Why is he not fearful? Why is he not in a dither over the choices we all, as his children, make? And I think it's because he sees the whole plan, he sees the potential. The more that I study the gospel, the more I realize how little we do understand
Mhm.
and know. And I think we would like to, in our finite minds, come up with this idea of how we think the judgment and all the degrees of glory and all the things are going to look. And I actually think we have no idea. We just don't know very much. And we don't even know what that's going to look like. And so I think, again, like you said, when we understand God, Nephi said, I do not understand the meaning of most things, but I do know that God loves his children. And I think about that all the time. I know he loves his children. And so he wants for their success. That's his whole goal. It's his only goal. It's his work and his glory. That is to help us be successful. And so when Elder Kieran says, he's in relentless pursuit, he's in relentless pursuit of our children. And I think for me, it gives me the ability to relax. God's got this. God's got it covered. He sent his son. The atonement is real, it's infinite, and it's eternal. And I don't know how things are going to work out. I don't know how he's going to make all these things right that we worry about and stress and all the crazy decisions and all the things. I know God knows what kind of world he's putting children into, but he's not afraid. And I think it's because he knows I got you covered. I've got your children covered. Relax, find peace in me, love, and things are going to be okay. That's really my sense. Things really, I
Yeah.
think, are going to be okay.
Yeah. I mean, don't you find that being a parent, even though it's really scary, but it's also helped me to really understand God more. And I'm with you. I feel like we know so little. But there's something that feels safe about looking at it and say, well, this is what it's going to be like, right? Like that's the
Right.
safety that we're seeking for. So there is no way as a parent then that there's nothing that would keep my kids from me. There's nothing my kids could do that I'd be like, sorry, you're done. You can't have a relationship with me anymore. You can't be where I am. I mean,
Yeah.
there's just, and I can't help but think that it's the same for God. Like there's nothing we can do to keep us from him. And when we understand that, like, I guess I just feel like everything's going to work out. There's so much we don't know, but there's just no way that I think that he doesn't want us all back with him. And that just shifts so many things for me.
It does me too, and it gives me a lot more peace and a lot less anxiety. I think when we turn over this control and this fear to a spirit of peace, a spirit of love, and we just, I mean, that's the one thing we can control as a parent.
Mm-hmm.
I think I told you this on the last podcast, but I remember back in the day when I felt like a good mom. I had a certain expectation, and that was based upon how my kids turned out, right? Like if they all
Mm-hmm.
get married in the temple and serve missions and do all the things, then I can give myself permission to be a good mom. And I remember having to figure out, because unfortunately, our kids just are not going to do that. They're not always going to do that. And so I redefined for myself what a good mom is. And in my mind, this is the definition. And by the way, I want you to notice it doesn't have anything to do with any outward or exterior anything. Anything my kids do, it's all about me. And it is that I show up. This is a good mom in my eyes. I
Mm-hmm.
show up, I keep trying, I keep loving. That's all in my power. And then the kids are going to make decisions, but I can always show up. I can always keep trying to improve. And I can always relentlessly love them no matter what choices they make. And then I can be settled in the idea I'm a good mom. I've done my
Mm-hmm.
best. I've
Yeah.
tried. And regardless of what happens, I hope and pray. I even have a big statement on my wall in my kitchen that says, no matter what, you will always be loved here. And I put that on my wall. So as my kids walk in the house and they're now all grown, no matter what, you will be loved here. And I think that would be the sign God would give to us. No matter what, I want you to know I'm always going to love you. Are there consequences sometimes? Yeah. But those are natural generally. God's like, well, yeah, sometimes those are some of the natural consequences of choices, but he never withholds love. He
Yeah.
never withholds the idea that we can always change, that we can always repent, that we can always become better and do better. And to me, that's such a hopeful message as a parent.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect place to like wind this up. It just feels like we're leaving with so much peace and hope and
Yeah,
happiness. So thank you,
you're
Tiffany,
welcome.
for
It's always
having
a
this
privilege.
conversation with me. Before we leave, though, can you share with people how they can connect with you?
Yes. I have a website. It's called directyourlifecoaching.com, and they can find everything they want to know about me. They can sign up for a consult call if they're interested in having their young adults or them themselves talk to me. I also have an Instagram. It's Tiffany_Rhoton, Rhoton, coaching.com. That's quite a mouthful, isn't it? I should
Yeah,
change
it's
that.
great.
And then I also have a podcast, and I often send when parents are like, I don't know if my child really wants to come talk to a life coach. I'm like, well, send them to my podcast. It's called Happy Young Adults. It's on most of the platforms, and it just kind of warms up them to the idea of what I teach and who I am. And, I've got, 30 plus episodes now, but it's just a way to kind of help spread the message of what I do
Yeah,
as a life
yeah,
coach and help them understand themselves a little bit. So, yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much for being with me, Tiffany. I love these conversations. They're like what keeps me going. So thanks for being part of it.
You're welcome. Thanks, Heather.
Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.